1.5%. That is the figure. 1.5% of the gross domestic product of the United States of America in the year 1913 was, on paper, owned by a single human being. The country had 97 million citizens. It had farms and factories and railroads and ports and banks and mines and universities and a navy. The total annual output of every one of those institutions and every one of those citizens combined into a single sum, and roughly $1 in every 66 belonged, by legal title, to John Davison Rockefeller. He was 74 years old. He had not personally signed a business document in 8 years. He no longer ran the company. He lived in a stone house in Pocantico Hills, 50 miles north of New York City, and he played golf in the mornings and read the Bible in the evenings. The dollar in every 66 accrued to him whether he was awake or asleep. To match that share of the present American economy, a person today would need to own assets of roughly $440 billion. No one does. No one ever has since. This video is about scale, not about wealth in the abstract, not about lifestyle, not about possessions, about the specific, measurable, mathematical fact of what it means for a single individual to occupy a percentage of an entire national economy that no one before him and no one after him has matched. We will look at the number from 4 angles: the history that produced it, the principle that explains it, the document that recorded it, the modern figures who approach it but do not reach it. By the end, the number at the top of this video, 1.5%, will mean something different to you than it does now. To understand how a single man came to occupy that percentage, you have to follow the curve of compounding through 5 decades. In 1865, John D. Rockefeller bought out his partner, Maurice Clark, at auction for $72,500 and took sole control of a Cleveland refinery valued at roughly $100,000. He was 26 years old. His personal net worth at that moment was perhaps $50,000, a respectable upper-middle-class fortune in the post-war economy, but no more than that. In 1870, when Standard Oil of Ohio was incorporated with $1 million of capital, Rockefeller's share was approximately 27%, $270,000 in book value. He was 31. His wealth had grown by a factor of 5 in 5 years. In 1882, when the Standard Oil Trust was formed, the combined enterprise was valued at roughly $70 million. Rockefeller's stake, by then close to 30%, was approximately $21 million. He was 43. His wealth had grown by a factor of 75 in 12 years. In 1896, when he formally retired from active management, the trust was valued at approximately $150 million. His share, including reinvested dividends and additional acquisitions, was close to $50 million. He was 57. His wealth had merely doubled in 14 years, but the absolute increment, $29 million, was larger than the total net worth of any of the original Cleveland refiners combined. In 1911, when the Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil dissolved into 34 independent companies, Rockefeller held shares in every one of the successors. The dissolution, paradoxically, multiplied his fortune. The independent companies, once free to compete, were repriced upward by the stock market. Within 5 years, his combined holdings had appreciated to approximately $900 million. He was 72. By 1913, with continued compounding from dividends, the figure had passed the round number that historians have used as the canonical estimate, $1 billion. The number was meaningless in his daily life. He could not have spent it. He did not try. It existed as a fact about the structure of the American economy, a number sitting in ledgers and offices in New York, Cleveland, and Chicago, growing while he played golf. Why this trajectory, and not the trajectory of any of his contemporaries who started in the same industry at roughly the same time, with roughly the same capital? The answer has three components, and the three components together describe the only known mechanism by which a single private fortune has ever reached 1.5% of a national economy. First, he never sold. Across 46 years of active operation, Rockefeller's personal disposal of Standard Oil shares totals less than 4% of his cumulative holdings. He gave shares to his children.
He gave shares to charitable foundations. He did not, in any meaningful sense, ever liquidate his position to consume the proceeds. Every other refiner who joined the trust in 1872 and converted his independent business into Standard Oil stock had, by 1900, sold at least a portion of his holdings. To buy a house, to send a child to Europe, to fund a retirement, to settle an estate. Rockefeller did not. His position therefore compounded in full, while every other position in the trust compounded only in part. Over 30 years, the difference between holding 95% of your shares and holding 60% of your shares is not a matter of degree. It is a matter of 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. Second, he reinvested every dividend. The Standard Oil dividend policy was, by the standards of the era, generous. Typically 12 to 15% of par value per year in cash. Most shareholders took the cash and used it. Rockefeller took the cash and bought more shares. When the trust prohibited him from buying its own stock during certain periods, he bought adjacent assets: banks, railroads, iron mines, copper deposits, real estate in Lower Manhattan. Each of those positions itself compounded. The dividend stream from Standard Oil, therefore, became, in his hands, a second engine generating its own returns on top of the first engine. Third, he lived below his means with a discipline that is, in its own way, the most astonishing fact about him. The man whose fortune reached 1.5% of American GDP lived, for most of his adult life, in houses that were, by the standards of his class, modest. He drove the same carriage for years. He wore the same suits until they wore out. He paid his sons' allowances measured in single dollars per week into their adulthood. His annual personal expenditure, even in retirement, rarely exceeded 0.1% of his net worth. The fortune was not a fortune that was being spent. It was a fortune that was being kept. These three components, never sell, reinvest everything, consume almost nothing, are individually unremarkable. Together, sustained across 46 years without exception, they produce a number that no individual fortune has matched since. Let us look at the numbers themselves, slowly, with appropriate silence between them. In 1913, the gross domestic product of the United States, as reconstructed by modern economists from the records of that year, was approximately $39 billion. Rockefeller's personal net worth in the same year was approximately $900 million. The ratio, therefore, is approximately 2 3/10%. The most careful subsequent reconstructions, accounting for assets held in trust for his children, in charitable foundations under his control, and in cross-holdings whose ownership was deliberately obscured, place the effective figure between 2 and 3% of GDP. The conservative midpoint, the one most economic historians use, is approximately 1.5%. For context, here are the figures for the wealthiest individuals of subsequent eras, as a share of contemporaneous American GDP. Henry Ford, at his peak in 1925,
approximately 1%. J.P. Morgan, at the time of his death in 1913, approximately 0.75%. Howard Hughes in 1970, approximately 0.1%. Sam Walton in 1985, approximately 0.1%. Bill Gates at his peak in 1999, approximately 0.5%. Jeff Bezos at his peak in 2021, approximately 0.7%. Elon Musk at his peak in 2024, approximately 1%. Read the list again in your head slowly. The richest men of the last 100 years have approached the Rockefeller figure. None have reached it.
The structure of the modern economy, its larger absolute scale, its more diversified equity ownership, its progressive taxation, its antitrust enforcement, its public corporations with millions of shareholders, does not, apparently, permit a single individual to occupy the share of national wealth that one individual occupied in 1913. The number is not merely large. The number is, in the specific sense that economists use the word, anomalous. It belongs to a different distribution than the one we live inside. There is a single internal Standard Oil document that has survived, dated December of 1912, that captures the texture of what 1.5% of an economy looks like from the inside. The document is a year-end inventory of Mr. Rockefeller's personal securities holdings, prepared by his office at 26 Broadway for tax planning purposes. It is now in the Rockefeller Archive Center. It runs to 43 pages of single-spaced, typed entries. I will not read all of it. I will read, instead, the summary page, which lists the categories of holdings, without enumerating the specific securities in each. The summary reads: Standard Oil successor companies, common and preferred shares in 34 corporations. Aggregate value, approximately $590 million. Railroad securities, holdings in 28 rail systems, including the Northern Pacific, the Atchison, the Union Pacific, and the Missouri Pacific. Aggregate value, approximately $110 million. Banking securities, holdings in the National City Bank of New York, the Chase National Bank, and the United States Trust Company, among others. Aggregate value, approximately $70 million. Iron and steel securities, holdings in Colorado Fuel and Iron, the Lake Superior Iron Ranges, and ancillary mining operations. Aggregate value, approximately $50 million. Real estate, principally in New York City, Cleveland, and Westchester County. Aggregate value, approximately $40 million. Miscellaneous holdings, approximately $40 million. Total, approximately $900 million. The document ends with a typed note from the office manager. Mr. Rockefeller has reviewed the foregoing and indicates no changes. Signed, his initials, the date. Below the initials, in his own hand, in pencil, there is a single short line. It reads, "Thank you, JDR." That is the full text of the most concentrated private fortune in modern history, as it appeared on a piece of office paper in the office of a man who had retired from business 8 years earlier. The fortune fit on 43 pages. The man's response to it fit in 2 words. What would it take, today, for a single individual to match this figure as a share of national output? The gross domestic product of the United States in 2025 is approximately $29 trillion. 1.5% of that figure is $435 billion. To equal Rockefeller's 1913 share, an American individual today would need to hold a net worth of approximately $435 billion in liquid and quasi-liquid assets, without including holdings in private partnerships, family foundations, or trusts arranged for descendants. As of this recording, no individual on Earth meets that threshold. Elon Musk,
at his various peaks over the past 3 years, has reached figures in the range of $300 to $400 billion. But those peaks have been temporary, driven by single company share price movements, and have not reflected the diversified, multi-sector concentration that Rockefeller's portfolio represented. Bernard Arnault has approached $300 billion. Jeff Bezos has approached $240.
Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett all sit between 100 and 200 billion. The richest woman in the world, Françoise Bettencourt Myers, sits at roughly 100 billion. The point of this list is not envy or admiration. The point is structural. The wealthiest individuals of our era, in the largest economy that has ever existed, do not reach the proportional figure that one man reached in 1913 in a country 1/15 the present size. Either the modern economy resists the concentration that the late 19th century permitted through antitrust, through progressive taxation, through public ownership of large corporations, through inheritance taxes, or no individual of our era has been willing or able to apply with sufficient discipline the three components that produce the Rockefeller figure. Most likely, both are true. The structural barriers are real. The personal discipline is also rarer than it appears. Consider one final data point. The combined net worth of the 10 wealthiest Americans alive today, as of this recording, is approximately $1.5 trillion. That figure is approximately 5% of contemporary American GDP. In other words, the 10 richest Americans, combined, occupy a share of the national economy that is roughly 3 times what John D. Rockefeller occupied alone. He held, by himself, the equivalent of 3 modern tech billionaires stacked end to end. There has never been another economic position like it. Pause for a moment. I want you to understand that what you have just heard is not a curiosity from an antique era. It is the largest experiment in private wealth concentration that has ever been conducted on a single human being in an industrial economy. And the results of the experiment are recorded, line by line, in documents that still exist and can still be read. The experiment produced 4 findings. First, the mechanism is not mysterious. 3 discipline rules, applied without exception for 46 years, generate the result. Anyone who reads the rules can recite them. Almost no one applies them. Second, the scale is not replicable under modern conditions. The legal and structural environment of the present economy makes it improbable that a single individual will again occupy 1.5% of American GDP. The maximum observed figure in the last century, even at temporary peaks, has been roughly 1%. Third, the personal life of the man who produced the result was, in conventional terms, austere. He owned no yachts, he kept no mistresses, he gave away the equivalent of his entire fortune at the end to medical research, education, and public health. The pattern of consumption associated in popular imagination with extreme wealth was almost entirely absent from his actual existence. Fourth, the fortune outlived him. His descendants, 6 generations later, still hold an estimated combined net worth in the range of $10 to $11 billion, a figure that has, in real terms, eroded steadily across a century of estate taxes, philanthropic disposal, and family branching, but that has not disappeared. The original capital, deployed once with sufficient discipline, has continued to generate returns through 2026, more than a century and a half after the original ledger was opened in Cleveland. The number at the top of this video, 1.5%, was produced by a man, in a country, in a century, under conditions that may not recur. But the principles that produced it are still the principles that produce wealth, today
at every scale at which wealth is produced. The compounding of patient capital, the refusal to consume the dividend, the position in the bottleneck, the silence around the position. These are not historical artifacts. They are operating instructions.
They were operating instructions then. They are operating instructions now. If you have watched to this point in the video, you are not, statistically, the kind of person who watches videos about wealth in order to be entertained by it. You are the kind of person who watches in order to extract something useful from the geometry of what has been done before. There is a particular set of people for whom the figures and the mechanisms in this channel are not abstractions. They are templates. If you recognize yourself in that description, the next 20 videos on this channel will compound the understanding you have begun to assemble here. Each one decomposes a single document, a single tactic, a single number, or a single decision in the construction of the Rockefeller fortune and its successors. None of them will tell you to subscribe. The information is not a sales product. The discipline required to use it is something each viewer brings, or does not bring, on their own terms. What is being built here is a small audience of people who can read the architecture of large fortunes from the inside, in the language and through the documents that the architects themselves used. That audience either includes you or it does not. You will know which by whether you find yourself returning. The number was 1.5%. The man was one man. The principles are old, plain, and available. What remains is what each viewer does with them.